Hello, everyone. Welcome to the September 2024 edition of our TEP webinar series. I am super delighted to have you join us today. My name is Zeno Bernard, and I'll be your host in today's webinar. And today, building on our previous discussion in August, this month, we will be discussing the topic Out of School Children Crisis in Africa, Implications and the Way Forward. In our previous webinar, which was held in August, we discussed the topic Advancing Learning Through the Use of Mother Tongue. And today, we shall be prioritizing the statistics of out-of-school children and its socio-economic implications and how this can be mitigated, especially in the African context. For everyone that is just joining us today, I am happy to have you here with us. Please tell us your name, tell us your organization, and what you intend to learn from today's conversation. You can also tell us the country you're joining us from. I'll be looking forward to your responses in the chat box. Please do tell us your name, tell us where you're joining from and the country you're joining from and what you intend to learn from today's conversation. Hi, Samson Oyebade. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing what you intend to learn from our conversations today. And moving on, I'm still waiting for your responses. Hi, Olayide. Thank you so much. I see you. Thank you, Aina, for being here with us today. Thank you, Samson. And someone is here to learn about how research on alternative schooling can be improved in Africa. And thank you so much. Hi, Ibironke from London. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Moving on. I'm still looking forward to your responses. Please kindly engage us. Moving on, my job this morning will be to briefly introduce the NICE community. NICE stands for the National Innovation Collaborative for Education. So NICE is a community of education innovators that is committed to increasing access to quality education for all children, especially created by the Education Partnership Center. So NICE currently engages the following channels, which includes our monthly newsletter. We have our podcast, which is titled Education Unscripted. We also have our virtual and in-person meetups like today's webinar event. These webinar series has explored several themes as highlighted in the previous edition of NEDIS. If you'd like to collaborate with us on these webinars, please send an email to nice@tepcenter.com. You'll find the email in the chat box. We also have EdMeet, which is a bridge builder event that has been designed to provide a platform for education and other sector experts to collaborate and synergize for the purpose of solving complex problems and strengthening access to quality education. We've had previous editions of NEDI, which includes EdMeet Tech. We've had EdMeet Foundational Learning, and in the near future, we shall be having EdMeet Climate Change. The NICE community is also an outcome of the annual Innovation Summit, which is NEDIS, organized and hosted by the Education Partnership Center. Established in 2016, NICE is a budding community that has been designed to facilitate continuous learning and collaboration. The 7th edition of NEDIS was held in October 2022, and it was themed Reimagining Education Development in Africa, Bridging the Skills Gap. And the summit focused on how to recalibrate education, innovation, and development to ensure that all children and young people are fully equipped to thrive in life and contribute meaningfully to society. We've seen recent events from the flooding, pandemic to insecurity. And these effects have gone on to show that not all children have the ability to pass through the traditional classroom. So how do we then ensure that these children are not forgotten, but can still gain access to quality education in spite of these challenges? And that is why the 8th edition of the Education Innovation Summit would focus on sustainability and education innovation. If you would like to stay updated on these events and many more event by the Education Partnership Center. Please join our mini lists to stay updated. And I would like to announce that we are currently live. I would like you to invite your friends, invite your colleagues, because it's going to be an insightful conversation today. Moving on, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator this morning. Our moderator is Mufi, who is a senior program assistant at the Education Partnership Center. Hi, Mufi. Good morning. Over to you.
Hi, Zeno. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. We have a beautiful lineup of speakers today, and I'm managing international development aimed at enhancing education quality, equity, and accessibility for vulnerable children and youth in Nigeria and South Sudan. Currently is the team leader, founder of Quality Education Development Associates, KIDA, an association dedicated to driving sustainable and scalable solutions for accessible quality education in Africa. He has an extensive experience in leading impactful mother tongue early grade reading interventions in Nigeria. His technical expertise spans roles such as education specialist in USAID, Nigeria Community Participation for Action in the South, Social Sector Project Compass, Education Quality Specialist for DFID, Education Sector Support Program, and Senior Teacher Education Advisor on USAID's Northern Education Initiative activity. Additionally, his background includes contributions to teacher development programs and crisis response projects, reflecting a deep interest in education reforms, reading initiatives, and teacher education. He is a former facilitator of Google Digital Skills for Africa, former computer lab specialist and assistant center manager at Max Center in South Africa. Through his company, Crystal MG Trading and Project, he aims at enhancing traditional ECD educational methodologies to integrate computer science as part of the comprehensive education offering in partnership with owners of licensed ECD centers and primary schools. His programs extend to other grades where he teaches end-user computing and introduces students from rural communities to robotics, virtual reality, and etc. He intends to use his knowledge and network to continue expanding his enterprise and his youth organization to reach village communities across Chief Executive of IA Foundation, a UK charity helping out of school children in Nigeria. She's an award-winning fellow of ICANN based in the UK and was the former chairman of ICANN UK. She's currently the chairman of the Education Committee of Nigeria British Business Forum. She is passionate about developing the future human capital indices of Nigeria. She is a philanthropist, education advocate, and she was recently awarded for being one of the 8 Black and ethnic minority women in the UK who have professionally broken the glass ceiling in the UK in 2023. In 2023, Ronke was listed among the top 50 CEOs by The Guardian and listed among the 100 most outstanding Nigerians in the diaspora as a result of our investment in reducing the out-of-school children crisis in Nigeria. You're welcome, Mrs. Adiagbo. And finally, we have Ms. Frecia Kagu, who is the Advocacy and Partnership Officer for the Forum for Africa Women Educationalists, which is where she leads on advocacy work, fosters partnerships with global, regional, and national stakeholders, and strengthens the capacity of the FAWE network to respond to the educational. She has a wealth of expertise in lobby and advocacy litigation, coalition building, policy influencing children's rights, research, capacity development, community development, and project management. You're welcome, Ms. Kago. We have a lot of packed session today, a lot of questions, and we will be diving right in. So please get your questions ready as the conversation continues. So now to Mr. Nuruddin Lawal, civil review of the current statistics for out-of-school children crisis right now in Africa.
Thank you very much, moderator Mufi, and I want to say a very big congratulations to the Education Partnership Center. And I want to also say a big thank you to all the participants that have taken their time to join this important discussion. And we are talking about sub-Saharan Africa that has about 45 countries of the countries in Africa. And we are talking about a situation where more than 63 million students, children, out of school. That is really going up. And we're talking about a situation where we've been able to move considerably from a situation where we have very little number of children in school to a situation where we've been able to have 152 million children as at 2013 that have come to school. That is, in 1990, we have 63 million children in school. And by 2013, we have an estimated 152 million children in school in sub-Saharan Africa. I think that is great in terms of achievement. But despite that achievement, there's still so much to be achieved, as sub-Saharan Africa has almost 60 million children out of school right now. And this is accounting for almost half of the out-of-school children in the whole of the world. This is something that we are not proud of, and we should not be proud of. And when we are talking about out-of-school children, we are talking about children that are between the age of 6 to 14 or 7 to 15, depending on which part of sub-Saharan Africa that you are talking about. In terms of those countries that are really lagging behind, Liberia is one of them with more than 61%. Niger is one of them with about 51%. But in terms of sheer number, I think there are some countries that will actually dwarf the remaining countries in terms of the population they carry. And Nigeria is one of them with more than 10.5 million. I think that number has ranged between 10.5 million and 18.5 million and 20 million, depending on who is quoting that data. Ethiopia has, as of 2018, more than 7.5 million children that are out of school in that age range, while the Democratic Republic of Congo has 3.2 million children out of school. But don't forget that the big thing and the most interesting thing is that sub-Saharan Africa has the about 50% of the world out of school children. And if you look at this figure, you see that also about 50% of that figure are girls. Approximately 50% of that figure are girls. So in terms of the data around out-of-school children, you see that we're still very much behind, despite the fact that we've been able to achieve so much in terms of increasing enrollment in school. Actually, we will think that The question is between, are we interested in enrollment or are we interested in functional literacy and numeracy? Because quality comes to mind anytime I talk about enrollment. And so that is the situation we have right now in terms of the data, that we are not doing too good. It's a bad situation in sub-Saharan Africa, that we have more than 50% of the world out of school children residing in sub-Saharan Africa. Over to you, Mofin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawal. We can really see how the overview of this crisis is very discouraging. I would like to hear from someone outside of Nigeria. Mr. Mike Anthony, can you give an overview from the Southern Africa and African part of Nigeria, of Africa rather? Mrs. Ibrahim Adiagbo, what's your idea on the out-of-school children, your overview on the out-of-school children crisis in Africa?
Right. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank my fellow panelist, Mr. Nuruddin Lawal, for putting the figures into context for us. It's very sad to know that when it comes to collating data on the number of out-of-school children, Africa in generally is lagging behind. Most of the time, we have to rely on the likes of UNICEF to give us that information. That for me is fundamentally wrong. This is our problem. We need to find a robust way of collating the data. Because if you don't know how much number of after-school children you're dealing with, how would you be able to provide proactive solution to solving the problem? Now, the most reliable data we have is from UNICEF. And for Nigeria in particular, previously it was 20.2 million, but the latest statistics we've had from UNICEF is now 18.3 million. 10.1 million of that is in primary school, and 8 million plus is in junior secondary school in Nigeria. Nigeria accounts for one of the countries that has one of the highest in Africa. We account for 33% of the out-of-school children in Africa. And generally in Africa, we have lots of out-of-school children. And it is not just in Africa only. India, Pakistan has got, well, they've got high out-of-school children. Now, whilst we realize that, it's important and it becomes imperative that the emphasis should be put on the data collection. I was listening to the interview of the Minister of Education in Nigeria. He could not put a number to the number of out-of-school children in Nigeria. So if you don't have an idea of the size of the problem, how can you find solution to it? So what I'm trying to say this morning is that in governance, it's important that you measure things that are absolutely important. Now, these children are your future manpower. If we don't take their plight seriously, then we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. So it's very, very important that we pay attention to the number of out-of-school children, because there's a vicious circle here. There is a correlation between insecurity and the number of out-of-school children. You check the statistics. Where you have high level of insecurity is because they have high level of out-of-school children. Because when these kids do not have access to education, they don't have the skill set to be able to become economically active. Therefore, they have no choice but to actually resort to crime. Therefore, you have high level of insecurity. And because you have high level of insecurity, that will not even affect the ability for children to go to school to get education. Because I'm sure you are aware of the Chibok girls that were kidnapped in Nigeria. And there's been lots of episodes of kidnapping of school children. The people kidnapping these children are bandits. I'm sure most of them haven't got very good education, because if they have good education, they would not resort to banditry and kidnapping of school children. So because they had no access to education, they are now disturbing the future generation that are trying to access education. And as a consequence of their action, many parents are afraid to send their children to school. So any government of the day should take this seriously. This should keep them awake at night. It's the fundamental human right of every child to have access to education. We have no business having huge number of out-of-school children on the street. So I want to encourage the government of the day of every country in Africa to please pay attention to this menace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Adiagbo. I mean, in conjunction to what Mr. Lawal spoke on in regarding data, and then in what you spoke about in evaluation of the data and the priorities that we are supposed to is our government is really lacking. It shows how much work we have to do as both a country and as a continent put together. So, Mr. Lawal, from your wealth of knowledge, could alternative education models such as indigenous knowledge systems or non-formal education offer more sustainable and culturally appropriate solutions to Africa's out-of-school children crisis? Hello, Mr. Lawal.
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Yeah, the question you asked around what are the alternatives that we have is really an interesting one, because as at today, there have been so many policies that have been put in place to ensure that generally there is a mitigation of the situation. But I'll give you an example of some of those measures that have been put in place. This year is the African Year of Education. We've had so many school enrollment campaigns, national, at state level, at LGAs. We've had so many out-of-school children policies put in place. And there's so many programs around girl child education to even ensure inclusiveness. The UBEC policy, and I would like to recognize an elder statesman who I've seen among the participants, Professor Pai Obaya, who himself was the one that birthed the Universal Basic Education Commission policy. It was to address the out-of-school children and ensure quality in education. Unfortunately, down the years, almost 15 years, 16 years now, we are still battling with the problem. And Yoruba people will say that and that means that instead of things becoming better, it's even becoming worse, because we were not 10.5 million, 10 million for a long time. Obviously, it has gone up. Is it 18.5? Is it 20.1? Like I said, it depends on who is quoting what. And so this is a very big problem. The UBEC policy was supposed to create what we call free compulsory primary education for all children in Nigeria. And anytime I think about what it was to achieve and where we are 15 years down the line, I tend to ask questions like, when is it the right time to go back to that policy and think of how that policy has performed? And if there are things to tweak in that policy, to tweak it and make it more functional. Also, we've had so many documents around non-formal education. We've had even alternatives to what I would call the formal school system, which is the Associated Basic Education Curriculum that is supposed to constrict the different lower primary school into 1 year. I think upper primary school into 1 year, and junior secondary school into 1 year, due to conflict situation, due to context and all of that. But the problem also of recent, we have the Al-Majri Commission that has been set up, and we have out of school children departments almost in every agency of education government. We have the National Commission for Mass Education in Nigeria. For me, we've done so much. What alternatives do we have? I would say that the alternative that we have is to implement the policies that we have put in place and to be able to review those policies to see how well they are performing and very well tweak them to perform as to the level at which we want them to perform. I think that largely the situation we experience is an inequity kind of position. Don't forget that for every situation of out of school children, there's a big correlation between out of school children and the level of poverty in a community. So if we say we have this number of out of school children, don't forget that you are saying this is the extent of the poverty index of your community. And anywhere where you see high level of out of school children, you see high level of poverty, which is correlated with economic growth. And so it shows how much there's inequity, inequality in our communities. And that is a big pity. And then there are girls involved in this because when you educate girls, you educate the world. We all know that. And 50% of this population, nothing less than 50% of this population are girls. I also think that the alternatives we have is to ensure that we properly and adequately hand over education to the community. We've not done this successfully. No, we've not done it successfully. Communities need to value education. Communities need to manage their education if we are going to achieve any meaningful success. The communities know the out of school children. So what are we talking about? And so we continue to go round and round and round this issue as if we don't know what to do. So I tell you that the solution is to ensure that we improve, the alternative we have is to ensure that we make sure that the community take over education at all levels and really take it over. And we improve the status of the economic index of our communities. If we have a poor community, you can be sure that the issues we have will continue the way they are and will continue to be worse. Because when you think about it, it's the children of the poor that you see among the bandits, it's the children of the poor that you see among the kidnappers and all of that. So why don't we educate our communities? Why do we think that this inequality will have to continue?
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I completely agree with your sentiments. I can't currently remember the part of Africa where a community involved the parents and they reviewed on a quarterly basis the progress they were making with the children and those that needed to even resume school. So from the African context, you can't actually exclude the community aspect and also implementing the UBEC policy in bringing in this, in bringing home the indices of how to get children in schools, because this policy is all-rounded. So I completely agree with your sentiments. So speaking to Mrs. Adiagbo, from the from what we have said, how can sustainable education models be developed to ensure that these children not only enter school but also stay in school?
Okay, so thank you so much for that. So what I mean, the way I'm going to go about this is I will start from how governance can help to sustain children in school. Now, we need the political will from the government of the day. I mean, it's all easy to talk about these numbers, but if the political will is not there to obtain it, we're just wasting our time. So government need to take this matter very, very seriously. I mean, a classic example in Nigeria, the government normally have their meeting on Wednesdays. If I was the president of Nigeria, I would make sure the data of out-of-school children is a standing agenda item at that meeting. I want to see the trajectory of the number of out-of-school children. That is absolutely important to make sure the government actually has an idea what we're dealing with regards to this out-of-school issue. Secondly, the government needs to take census very seriously. In Nigeria, you are required to have, it's a legal requirement to have census every 10 years. For over 17 years, we didn't have a census in Nigeria. That is wrong and it's illegal. It's important because if you don't collate the data, you have no idea what you're looking at in terms of the problem we're dealing with. So apart from the census, it's also important that the government of the day put legislation in place to make sure when anyone gives birth to a child, that child is registered at birth. So it becomes a crime if you give birth to a child and you don't register that child with your local authority. Because what it is people have children, we don't know that those children exist. Therefore, the government cannot make provision for them educationally. So for the government to know that a child exists, it should become law that they need to, every parent that gives birth should register their child. Also, the government needs to put legislation in place that for any parent or guardian that does not send their children to school, there is a penalty for that parent, right? So that would actually motivate parents to actually do the needful and also send their children to school. Now, once we can tackle these two issues, that would in a way force the government's hand and the parents and guardians' hand to send their children to school. Now, my fellow panelist, Mr. Nuruddin, did mention that, you need to, poverty is part of the problem. Because there was a awareness walk I was going on in Nigeria, very close to the seat of government of the Lagos state government. And we were trying to pick up children from the street. And we found a boy who was hawking handkerchief. And I said, no, we want to take responsibility for your education. I took him to his father and said, please hand over this child to us so we can pay for that child to go to school. And the father was arguing, saying, no, I'm not going to release my child. And I couldn't understand because we're doing this for free. We are not telling you to pay. We said we'll pay for your child to go to school. Why would you not release that child to go and get education? And I explained to him that if you can let this child go and get education, this child will take the whole family out of poverty. The father was saying that this is an imminent problem for us. We are poor, we need money. So this child needs to go and hawk those handkerchiefs because it is whatever revenue the child gets on that day is what will feed them for the day. So he wasn't looking at what the child will do in future. It's like, now, I need to eat now. So the government of the day needs to also have some social interventionist approach for families that are poor. I know the government is trying to do something at the moment, the top-up cash scheme the government is rolling out, but they should roll it out more, far and wide. The other thing the Nigerian government is doing, which I also applaud, is the school feeding program. That is like a carrot you're dangling in front of the parents and the child, that if you go to school, you at least get one meal free. That is also a very, very good interventionist approach. But as I keep saying, it's important that the government takes this matter extremely seriously. Otherwise, the issue we are dealing with can devastate a whole country.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage the government to please pay more attention to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I completely agree with you. The political will is very much needed in driving home, implementing, bringing children into schools and getting the parents on board. However, I believe a number of this policy issue we have is accountability and evaluation, because a lot of policies are in place ensuring children are registered, ensuring children go to school, but to keep evaluating if these things are implemented is the challenge and the problem that we currently have in our economy and in our steps into school. what do you think are the responsibilities of African governments versus global institutions such as the UN, we talked about the UNICEF and the World Bank in resolving this crisis? We know we indigenous African governments have their responsibilities, but juxtaposing that with the responsibilities of the global institution, what responsibilities do you think they can handle or take over, oversee to ensure to mitigate this crisis? Ms. Kago, please.
Thank you so much, Mofe. Okay. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Fresha Kago. I work with the Forum for African Women Educationalists, commonly known as FAWE. FAWE is a Pan-African organization with 33 chapters across Africa in 33 countries. And the focus of FAWE is on education with an intersectionality on gender. We are headquartered in Nairobi, but yes, we work throughout the continent. Now, thank you so much for inviting us to this webinar, and thank you for the question. And when I was looking at it in terms of what responsibilities our governments and also the institutions, the global institutions, have in resolving education crisis, we do realize that really the buck stops with us. And it has to start with our African governments, because within our countries, they are in charge of policy development and implementation. They're the ones who are in charge of developing the framework and the policy frameworks. And also within these frameworks and the budget that allows them to provide free and affordable primary health or even secondary school level, and also ensuring that there's inclusive policies. When we're looking at education financing, we did have the Dakar Framework for Action, which in most our governments agreed that 20% of our national budgets should be allocated to education. However, when we look at what it is today, I don't think any African country has hit the 20 mark. And a lot of the African governments today are actually using a lot of the resources generated internally, mostly to repay foreign debts. And very little of it, is left for infrastructure development, teacher training, and issues like that. And a lot of that aspect has been left to the international partners. Even when we look at our curriculum development and teacher training, most of the times it takes so long before this is revised, that the curriculum is revised. But when we look at it today, the world has changed so much. And when we are looking at our curriculum, it has to be inclusive, it has to be responsive, it has to recommend or more or less respond to the socioeconomic needs of the countries. And I think even as FAWE, what we have developed, what we call the gender responsive pedagogy model, which we have been using for over 20 years now to train teachers on how to respond to gender. And you would think in today's day and age, an issue such as gender, how we address girls, I mean, you would think that today that would not be an issue, but you would still be surprised that when you go to the classrooms, teachers still do not even have or have not received or have very minimal training on how it is to handle gender and the gender dynamics for girls. And I think this translates also into the number of girls who take sciences and STEM subjects. And this is because then if they don't see female teachers who are being trained on STEM or female teachers training on STEM, or there's nobody encouraging or believing in them that they can take science projects, then it becomes an issue and we don't see many of them taking the uptick. Even when we look at it in terms of governments addressing inequalities, they do have a responsibilities in addressing the inequalities, ensuring that then they're removing the barriers that hinder girls from going to school. Or rather, there is also the aspect of the geographic inequalities, which prevent now the marginalized groups from accessing education. And as FAWE, this is something we have observed for so many years. And in the last 7 years, we have piloted a program which is called the Higher Education Certificate in Uganda. And this certificate, what it does is that what we realized is whether you come from a marginalized community or whatever status of education where you are learning, we know that everybody sits for the same national exam. And you'd find those who are coming from the marginalized communities would miss either entering the university by a point or two. And so the higher education certificate program is a bridging course that allows students from these communities to actually go through a bridging program that then allows them to transition into the university. And we can say we have seen the success of this because it has been we've seen the uptake of this by being recognized first by the Ugandan government. And also this has now been rolled out. We are rolling this out, and we have over 7 universities that are partnering with us. Also now, when we look at the global institutions, like you have rightly said, they also have the role and responsibility of financing education or offering technical and financial supports, because global institutions such as the UN, the World Bank, UNICEF, they have the financial support and also the financial muscle to be able to support governments or even advocate and push governments to prioritize education. Also, they have access to global platforms that also tend to have either their global advocacy platforms that also set agenda for the rest of the world. We know right now the Summit of the Future has just been concluded, which was happening on the margins of the UN General Assembly. And that is also now where they have developed the Pact of the Future. And now the Pact of the Future is what helps us figure out what next after the SDGs. And so such conversations have a lot of influence. And I would say, given the fact that all the panelists before me have spoken, given those statistics that are so dire for a continent like Africa, where majority of our population is the youth. So the lack of proper education, the lack of proper quality education, then again translates into poor results and poor transition into the job market. Also, it also looks at it, when we look at it in terms of job creation vis-a-vis the job market. And part of this is also the education that is being put in place must respond to the needs of the society today. We are a society now today where that is using a lot of technology, and there's not as many jobs that exist. And therefore, the push has to move from just creation of finding jobs to also creating jobs. Also, I think the international institutions, they do a lot of research and knowledge. And I think the first and the second panelists did highlight this, that a lot of the data that we rely on as Africa has been more or less gathered, or the research is done by these international institutions. So I think they also have a role to play, not just in sharing, but also involving the communities, as had been previously said, involving the local actors and those who are already at the community level, because the data is supposed to inform programming, it's supposed to inform change, it's supposed to inform the best practices. I think also the idea of forming partnerships and capacity building. A lot of these international institutions have they have the ability to create partnerships or networks that are wide and far-reaching, and they also have the ability to do a lot of capacity building. And I think because changes and trends are changing, new things are coming, new ways of doing things are coming up, whether they are efficient and more effective. And I think as the world changes and new resources and new even research comes up, I think then the international institutions have a role to play in creating partnerships and catalyzing a lot of capacity building. Also, now I think it's the issue of education standards and accountability. We do know that in Africa, and I think a lot of the challenges have been highlighted. And the one thing we do know about our governments is that they don't like being shamed on the international stage. Sometimes when you try and do advocacy at your community level or national level, your government will not hear you. But if the same statistics is presented at an international forum, you will see our governments or many of our governments reacting, and they're able to respond and take accountability. So I do believe that the international institutions and these global institutions can also play a crucial role in holding a lot of the governments accountable and in ensuring then that education is still a priority. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Kago. That was a full load of information, which is very vital. I mean, from what I picked from what you said, the African governments should take primary responsibility rather, in handling and dealing with these issues. Meanwhile, it is also the responsibilities of the international governments and bodies rather to support the African government where they are lacking. Now, speaking to lacking, there have been identified barriers to success in handling this crisis, like inadequate funding, policy gaps, and even challenges in implementation. All these that we have established in the past and while other panelists have been speaking. Now, Mr. Mike Anthony, how best do you think NGOs and these international efforts and African governments can actually address this issue?
Thank you so much, Program Director, and everyone who has joined in. I see a lot of young people and young leaders from different countries.
This is like poverty. Yeah. We've spoken about issues like inadequate funding, can be collaboration and working together.
So thank you so much to everyone who has joined in and for the opportunity. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the wonderful session. I think really Africa needs such a session currently. Actually, it's one of the issues that I'm passionate about. I actually spent a lot of years trying to work on these issues. And over the years, I was then fortunate to move and work on different levels of such issues from the ground up to the national and even on the international space. So I think also what we need to understand is that obviously there are different factors that contribute to out of school children, right? So as we try to come up with solutions to mitigate this, we must also understand it. But now also, maybe to address the question about what can government and NGOs and the international institutions maybe do to mitigate. I think firstly, we must understand that there are three parties or three segments to this. We have your government, and then we would have your private sector, and then we have your NGOs, right? So I see that a lot of the time we into saying government must do this and that. Yes, but now the question is what happens if the government does not do that, right? So I think it's important that we also understand that we have civil society and NGOs that actually are supposed to be lobbying, and they are doing a lot. So I think we need to try and firstly organize ourselves more. Sessions like this actually is already trying to address the problem that is at hand. So the more we organize ourselves is the more we will have credible data, is the more we're gonna be able to have a say. Because if you look at it, if we say we want to focus on international institutions like your USAID, your World Bank and stuff, what actually makes people and governments listen to them is because they have numbers. So as different NGOs and companies on the ground, we also need to organize ourselves so that we also have numbers. Because once we have numbers, then we're going to be able to put pressure on governments and say, but governments, you promised this and this and this and this. But one of the things that I realized that for the communities not to sometimes understand the mission is because they are not educated about these things, right? The story of the father that did not want to allow the child to go to schools is because he does not get the main objective or the main mission of the continent. And normally on the ground, parents don't even understand what is the policy. They don't know policies, but I think if we have sessions like this as NGOs, then we are trying already to educate the community. We need to involve more young people. Recently in South Africa, the president has signed the Bella Bill. For the first time, I think, in my life, I've seen the community engage so much into the bill that the president signed, because normally we just see these things signed on TV and then it's just a bill, that's it, we go on. But now at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is they do affect us. So, but what interested me this time is that I've seen even young people critiquing the bill, engaging. I've seen parents engaging. The bill is up for discussion, but what is important is we are talking about these things. And I think, honestly, we need to come up with more prevention measures, because we have children who are going to be at school and then they drop out. We need to find out what are the reasons, what are the factors contributing to that. But also, we then have children who would finish school and then they're out of school, but they don't know what to do. We need to invest more into leadership programs, and we've seen what these programs can do. I'm willing to bet a lot of participants who are in this session, a lot of even some of us as panelists, we actually are here because of the influence that these programs would have. So we also need to develop our own. But it's very important that we understand that Africa problems is our problem. Come from somewhere to come and come up with solution for us for free. Because also we must understand, if someone is going to come and provide solution for us, they're going to come at the price, and we might not like the price. But I think we are at a stage where we are privileged enough, like as compared to the other generation that came before us. We have technology. We can organize ourselves. We can start international structures, and it's very easy, honestly. We can just start by a conversation, see what we can do, come up with ideas, and then when now we speak to governments, I'm not just going to be Mike alone. I'm going to be Mike with 16, 30 countries behind me. Then governments will listen. So I think also one of the things we are missing is that governments will have these beautiful policies and sometimes even M&E structures, right? But now the question is, who is then holding the government accountable? Again, it brings us to the issue of organizing ourselves. We need to organize ourselves. We need to understand monitoring and evaluation. We must question governments. If they don't have, we must ask, why are you not having such monitoring and evaluations? Because there are a lot of companies that can provide that. And if they can't, let's provide them with the monitoring and evaluation structures. And then so that now we can critique something that we see and then we know what we are working on. But we are the one that is supposed to make that happen. No one is going to make it happen, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you very much. Like we have properly established and to hold one another accountable in partnership. The NGOs, the international bodies, they ask forward beyond just implementing the school in itself. Mr. Nuruddin Lawal, 6334 or 934 model solves this problem. Do you think it's currently solving the out-of-school crisis, out-of-school children's crisis problem, or might there be a need to, design alternative approaches specifically for this crisis? Hello, Mr. Lawal.
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Thank you again, and I would like to say many thanks for the point by Mike around the need for us to be the people to pressure government into implementing the policies. We've seen that a lot of the policies we have are so beautiful, and we've seen that like the policy that says that parents should be made to send their children to go to school is already in the UBEC policy, but nobody is implementing it. Who is supposed to see to the implementation? If the people keep quiet and sit down, nobody cares. Who is government? The people are government. So we are not asking enough questions. We are not doing enough as citizens to see that the things that concerns us are important to government. And that is why we have the problems we have in our communities. With regard to 6334 or 934, there is no problem with that policy. That policy in itself did not work as a policy, because that policy is supposed to have solved the problem of youth skill development in Nigeria. And to the best of my knowledge, it has not achieved that aim, because everybody still transits to university. Everybody still wants to go to university. By now, Nigeria should have skills, youth, and all of that down the line. This started in 1997, or is it 87? 1987 to date. We should have been enjoying the fruit of that by now. All the equipment that were bought, what happened to them? All the teachers, when they were trained to teach the skills and all of that, what happened to them? So I will say that, and I think at this point in time, we've even forgotten where we came from as a people, why we even started that system of education, why we have to change from the 5 years to the 6 years, that's the 3-3 form of education at the senior secondary, at the junior and senior secondary school level. So for me, that has not helped at all. And for us to see to the implementation of that policy would help the out-of-school children syndrome, because then the communities will see value for education. I tell you, part of the reasons why we are having this problem is that the communities are not seeing the value for education. When communities start seeing value for education, they'll be encouraged to send their children to school. So part of the problem and the alternatives and the various ways we can improve this is, one, for the 6334 to work even in the first place, it will give more confidence in the education system. The second part of it is we have the accelerated basic education curriculum that should be also made to work, so that the conflict situation we find ourselves in has so much exacerbated the situation at hand. So many children, more children out of school. The policies of government is further impoverishing the communities in many African countries. And the poorer we are as a people, I can tell you, the more we'll continue to go down the drain in terms of the situation with out-of-school children. The issue around making school more effective is really important. When the community sees that the schools are not succeeding, they will not want to send children to school. When you send your child to school and you see that most of the children have to trek very long distances, and when they get to school, there are no teachers in school. When they get to school, they don't come back to school. Illiterate parents know when children are learning. They know. The fact that the parent is illiterate does not mean that that parent does not know when children are not learning. They see what happens in school. They see that the teachers in schools are not well trained. They see that is that child that cannot read in the community that has been made to become a teacher in the school next door. So we need to take all of these issues serious and reduce poverty. I will add here that, like Mike said, and a lot of other people said, panelists said, we need to continue to forge alliance. Government will need to bring up proper policies and increase funding for basic education. And then we need to ask questions as a people from government on how well the policies enacted have been implemented. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawal. I share your sentiments 100%. It just goes to show that the success of getting children to school and also keeping them in school, because school enrollment is one thing, then also putting a priority on the community at the community level, because these are the effects of these children. I completely share your looking at the year of education and what the AU Summit has brought about, we can't exclude the aspect of technology and the influence of technology in a part initiative that was focused on helping children recover lost learning and improve foundational literacy. And remote or digital like this, like what I just mentioned, how can it be adapted for African countries where internet access is limited? Hello, Mr.
Hello.
Yes, okay.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. I think technology is like electricity. Remember when the time electricity came, so people were a bit skeptical about it because they were used to using wood and all that. But at the end of the day, people had to adjust to electricity, right? So I think it's very important that we try by all means to educate different communities, to persuade government that technology is here to stay. It's changed. There's nothing we can do about it, but we can also use it to our advantage. So I think besides lobbying and advocating government to invest more in the technology space, we also need to start at some point holding the private sector accountable as well. Because at the end of the day, the private sector is benefiting from the community, it's benefiting from the land, it's benefiting from a lot of things. So we need to hold, as NGOs, we need to hold the government accountable, but also we must find different and strategic ways to hold the private sector accountable as well, right? So they must also support. Countries will have social corporate investment programs where it's mandatory that big businesses, they must give back to the community. So if they give back, then there are benefits to that. So we also need to try by all means that all these stakeholders must give back to the community, because at the end of the day, we have a world which is on fourth industrial revolution. We have a world which is on already on 5G, right? But when you look at the stats, when you look at the report of African Union last time, Africa is still below 50% of people who have access to 3G, not just 4, 3G, but already the world is on 5G. So which shows that as Africa, we are really behind. And if you are behind, if you want to catch up, you need to run faster. But currently, when we look at how we are doing things, it's like we are relaxed. So it's very important that we need to invest more in the education space, but also our education, because of where the world is currently going, must include technology. I mean, think about it. If we did not have technology, we wouldn't be having these conversations, right? So it's easier for me to speak on a program which is happening in Nigeria while I'm in South Africa, and very cheap, right? So for us to do that, we need to understand that technology, it is a priority. So we must try by all means, maybe not to do away with the traditional learning methodologies, but at some point we need to try and advance them. And as a continent, we are the only continent that starts late when it's coming to technology. Last time when I went to United States, when I got there, kids at early childhood development, they're already doing far more advanced programs than what we are doing here. When you look at China, they are already doing programs that you get introduced to when you're at the varsity level. At the varsity level, you still need someone to assist you with basic computer skills, right? So it's very important that we need to encourage governments. We need to get into the technology space. And one of the biggest mistakes that we are making is that we're not taking care of our own as a continent. Because a lot of talent, once we have talent, other countries, they come and then they take the talent, right? So we need to make sure that as much as we introduce the technology, we need to try and create opportunities for all these young people that are going to be studying, and make sure that now, when they now excel, when they reach a certain level, now they must benefit the continent, right? I would rather have Mike benefit Nigeria than have Mike sometimes benefit United States, because the United States already is at a certain level, right? So, but again, it will take us back to the issue of organizing ourselves, like what NICE community is doing. So organizing ourselves, and then after that, make sure that we use this technology. Let's make it a norm. Let kids from as early childhood development phase, by the time kids reach primary level, they should be able to do their own research. High school students, when you look at most of the time, they're even struggling to do their own research. They cannot even Google properly just to search for basic information. So, which shows that we are starting late. Let's start as early as possible. Let's start when kids don't even see problems. At that age, when they are creative.
Countries in Africa, when we look at our statistics, the statistics that we have is that at the enrollment rate, however, the challenge that we are having is around retention and transition into higher levels. So at the point of entry, the children can go to school, but then there are a lot of issues or structural and social issues that then make them drop out of school along the way. And I believe it was the World Bank that did say, or they came up with a report that they were calling the State of Global Education Update. And it indicated that 9 out of 10 children in sub-Saharan Africa, even those who remain in school, they are unable to read and understand a simple text by age of 10. And the World Bank actually refers to this as learning poor. So we have children who are in school. However, the quality of education is so poor that by the time they are age of 10, they can't read a simple basic text. And I think the previous speaker did highlight and say that by a lot of technology, because we are in a world where we are using technology, and there's a fact that says, or the report that also highlighted that over 230 million jobs in Africa by 2030 are going to require digital skills. So then when we ask ourselves, what are these structural or issues that are having an impact on our children or them being excluded out of school? The very basic in any program, if you run any program or in any country, you will always, the one factor you will always come across is poverty and economic disparities. Across the continent, we have a lot of school or privatization of education. Those who can afford it take their children to private schools, and then the poor are left to take their children to government schools, which either lack the infrastructure, they do not have the enough, like the teachers to children ratio is actually not, it's not as it should be. And then there are also the issues of hidden costs, such as uniforms, school materials, transportations, and issues such as when we look at these children, they're asked to, either parents are being asked for development fees because either government is not subsidizing. And so at the point where we are, poverty is a big factor, or a big factor that is contributing to the issue of a lot of children being out of school. Gender inequality is also an issue. If you look at our African context, we have cultural norms and practices where they discriminate against the girl. I know if you have 2 children, a boy or a girl, and they say the family is poor, often or not, they will opt to take the boy to school, and then the girl will be married off. Also, when you look at the laws in the country, despite us having signed laws and policies like the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the United Nations Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which are globally signed by almost all countries in Africa, when you come to our national laws, we do find that we still have laws that say a girl can get married early, she only needs the permission of the parent. But even at that age, when they get married, it means then that they are actually going to drop out of school, because by that you can't take care of the home, be able to go back to school, you find then that they get children and they're not able to take care of the children and also be able to go out of school. And even in areas where the children get pregnant or teenage pregnancy, especially when they come from poor backgrounds, they are unable to go back to school because there's nobody who can support them or support their child while they go back to school. In Africa, and I think this has been highlighted, we have witnessed a lot of conflict and a lot of displacement. And also, if we look at the context, and this is across the continent, whether if you look at the South, we've had countries like Mozambique. In the East, we have DRC, we've got Somalia, Ethiopia crisis is still ongoing, Sudan is still on the crisis. Even in the West Africa, there's that entire belt, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria. And what tends to happen then when there's conflict, children can't go back to school, they lose a lot of time. And what tends to happen is then that they forget either what they have learned or then the focus becomes on survival. They are marginalized, they have to move. And with all this movement where they move across a different country, you're a refugee. And then when you look at what it means to be a refugee, and that brings with it an entire wide range of issues, because then the curriculum is either different, the language is different, even access to this curriculum or access to education is a problem. You're living in a tent, the families have been displaced, you've lost your document. So in itself, I do believe issues such as conflict and displacement affect the children. Also this year in Africa, 2024, we had over 19 countries in Africa that were undergoing an election. And across Africa, there is this trend where elections take place in schools. And either then schools have to be closed for the period of election, and then children also don't go back immediately because you're waiting to see whether there'll be violence or whether whoever has won will take up and whoever has lost will agree to it. But we have a lot of disputed elections, and then children lose a lot of time. We also have the issues of infrastructure and resources. And we do find that then those who are in remote areas, they lack adequate school infrastructure, including the classrooms, learning materials, and trained teachers. Majority of the time, you will find that those schools that are in the urban areas either do well because they are well-resourced, they have better resources, and those who are in the marginalized, some places, even the classroom, you still find students in Africa who are learning under a tree. So this reflects the broader structural inequalities because the rural to urban, because government within the urban centers, they already have amenities such as the roads, such as electricity. And so such infrastructure, such structural infrastructure then again contributed to children being out of school. We've also have the issues of ethnic and cultural marginalization, where we have a lot of communities in Africa that are either nomadic, indigenous populations, and they tend to not be included in the mainstream. Also, a lot of our education and I know this was part of what one of the areas that AU was advocating for was around the indigenous education and taking pride and having, not necessarily rewriting our history, but actually making sure that our history speaks to the truth and to the fact of what Africa is. I mean, if somebody came and said some white guy or explorer came and discovered Mount Kilimanjaro, but the question is that statement actually true, or was Mount Kilimanjaro still there? And that was the first white person to ever see Kilimanjaro. So the question has also been that as Africa, and I think this also speaks to the issue of us writing our own story, us writing our own facts as Africa, also identifying and tailor-making our own solutions to our own problems. And I think when we look at the systemic inefficiency, our education systems, we still have, and I think the previous speaker has spoken about technology and how the world has moved on. But we find, and I know this has been a running joke and a running meme in Kenya, that while the rest of the students in the world are being trained on technology and from a very young age, we still have in our curriculum parts of a locust. And the question has always been, what has parts of a locust? Whether it has a head, the thorax, and the abdomen, what has that got to help me within the context of the world that I am in today? So I do believe that the girl child, we find that the girl child is always more disproportionately affected, proportionally affected compared to the boy. This is because girls, if a girl, let's say, gets pregnant, she will either more or less, most often than not, they have to drop out of school and they're not able to re-enter school because then we find that they have to take care of the children. Our education systems, our school infrastructure either cannot help her because she's a nursing mother now while she's still a student. She has needs to support herself, the cost of education, plus also the cost of this baby who's been born. Also, we don't have the government subsidies or supporting them. So we will find that our inequalities, the rich will always have access to those. Yes, will have access, but while either you're poor or you're far or in the indigenous community, they are always affected.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fesha Kago. Thank you to all our speakers who have given in-depth wealth of knowledge to the subject matter. I want to very fantastic contributions from all our panelists. I saw Olaiwaju Oluniyan, if I'm getting the pronunciation right. I would like to unmute for you. I would like to allow you to speak, not long, so you can kindly make a contribution since there are no questions in the question and answer section. Please go ahead, Olaiwaju.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you to all the panelists and for the great insights you've provided to the topic. I just wanted to stress the importance of data on working on the out-of-school numbers and ensuring that we own our own challenges and take charge of our own issues so that we can get credible solutions. I was just going to throw to the panelists their thoughts on whether we as Africans, and bringing it down to Nigeria as well, whether we truly agree with the out-of-school children numbers as well. So we have a lot of out-of-school children, but we do have a lot of informal type of education that our data doesn't even capture, and even schools that our data, if we take Nigeria as a case study, that our EMIS data doesn't capture. So there are quite a number of schools in the country that the states do not capture because they are not approved. And so these schools educate quite a number of children. But then if we look at the data that we can rely on in terms of out-of-school children from UNICEF, they only work with our state data that is reported using the NEMIS database. Now, with that in mind, would we really agree that the out-of-school children, because a lot of work has been going on to ensure that most children are enrolled back into school, but sometimes the numbers just keep growing and we're all, disappointed and all of that. So first thing is, if we don't know the actual numbers, how can we find solutions? And then the second level is out-of-school children has to do more with access. How are we also tackling the learning poverty? Because once we solve the issue of getting more children into school, we then realize we have a bigger challenge in our hands of, are the children in school already? Are they learning? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that is a spot-on concern that most education enthusiasts are always bring to the table. Mr.
Mufin, you went off a bit, but I want to believe you're asking me to answer.
All right, I'm not sure he's there.
I want to say that question is a beautiful question. And to a very great extent, I want to align with you, Olaiwaju, on your feelings about the data. But either way, I want to believe that the out-of-school children numbers are they're very close to what is being touted around. But I want to align with you that we have a problem with the data, and we should be the one collecting our data ourselves and not depending on international agencies to do the collection for us. That being that, I also want to say that we need to define what schooling is. Should we be talking about out of school children, or should we be talking about, we should have another indicator around functional literacy and numeracy, and then have another indicator that will talk about being in school. And I think that what the purpose of basic education is in Nigeria is functional literacy and numeracy. And this can be achieved either in a non-formal education environment or a formal education environment. So if we can provide this, then that child has functional literacy and numeracy, and not necessarily the indicator for children enrollment in school should be another indicator entirely. I think that is what we should be asking for right now. And we should define what schooling and what functional literacy are ourselves. I hope that answers your question a bit. Thank you. Over.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, so it appears like Mofi's network is not really friendly today. I think she was trying to ask a question.
Okay.
There's a question here from Tijani, and it says, is asking, don't you think that the politicization of education in Africa, where education policies are often influenced by political agendas, contributes significantly to the issue of out-of-school children? How can we address this challenge to ensure education remains a priority? Yeah, that's a question. I think it would be great to have Mr. Nuruddin has spoken. Let's have Mr. Mike's input on this.
Thank you so much. Maybe just to jump straight on it. I think, again, it really brings us to the issue of organizing ourselves. If we don't organize ourselves, firstly, maybe just to start with the previous one, is that people will then come, count us, and say how many we are, and we don't have data to compare with, right? But if we are also doing the counting, right? But now, on this question, it's, if we allow, in fact, the reason why politics will have more influence on what is happening is because we allow it, right? Any country, most of the time, is run by business, NGO, and government, right? Business, which is the private sector. So we must always try to keep the balance. If everything is happening in the country is political, it means we don't have enough muscle on the NGO sector. So it's very important that we need to now strengthen the NGO sector and the civil society. But how do we then do that, right? We need to have different structures again that will then advocate, that will lobby different governments, that will hold these governments accountable. The same structure should also be able, in a position to even hold the private sector accountable, right? But if the civil society is not strong enough, I'm telling you, the problem we're going to be having is that we're going to have a lot of a lot of decision taken on the business side or on the government side or politics side. I had a privilege to sit down with one of the ambassadors in the United States, whose name is Ambassador Andrew Young. he worked closely with Martin Luther King. So one of the things that he said to me is that the difference between your generation, Mike, he was saying this to me. He said, the difference between your generation and our generation with Martin Luther King, with your Nelson Mandela, is that on our generation, we were a movement and everyone understood the movement, right? Whether the person is in business, is in education, or we all understood what is the movement, what is it that we're trying to achieve. So even if we're not gonna get it 100% correct, but because we had a movement, we had a certain understanding and a mission, we were able to get a lot of things done. But what's happening now is that Mike is gonna be doing his thing on his small corner in his country, and then we're gonna have someone else doing something. But once we start understanding the movement, once we say, okay, this is what we want to achieve, I get the sustainable development goals as well. But we need movements now. We need to say, this is what we want in the education space in Africa, not just in South Africa or Nigeria, but in Africa. Then we have a movement. Then we must invest in the movement. If we have a movie, the movie must speak to the movement. If we have pictures, it must speak to, everything must speak to that movement. Then we won't have politics overpowering the decision made in government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mike. That was a powerful insight. I'm wondering if Ms. Ibironke wants to speak to this. I would like to hear your thoughts on this particular question as well.
Okay, you just have to remind me of the question again.
All right, I'll take the question again. Tijani is asking, don't you think the politicization of education in Africa, where education policies are often influenced by political agendas, contributes significantly to the issue of out-of-school children? And how can we address the challenge to ensure that, education remains a priority?
Okay, so wonderful question. Yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Am I audible? Cool. So my opinion of this is that sometimes it's very convenient for our leaders to keep their citizens uneducated. Because it's obvious when the citizens are educated, they are empowered. So sometimes these leaders are the ones very deliberate in keeping these children out of school. And sometimes these children are always useful when it comes to election. They tend to use these children for things that the children shouldn't be doing. But because the kids are not educated, they are not the wiser. They don't know their right from their left, so they only do what they are told to do. So when we are talking about politicizing the out-of-school children issue, it plays to the interest of the politicians for their citizens not to be educated. Now, one of the things I normally say is that part of the solution to these out-of-school children is to ensure that anyone who wants to take up any political post should ensure their children are educated within that system. Because if their children are educated within that system, they will have no choice but to improve the standard and quality of education because their children are in that system. Now, nobody is saying you shouldn't send your kids abroad, but if you want to be in government, it becomes a prerequisite for you to contest for election and to hold public office. Your child must be within that system. Then the whole politicization will disappear because now they have to be genuine in their approach and the political will needs to be there to make sure the educational sector is improved and children are getting access to quality education. So that's my take on that.
Powerful. Thank you so much.
I just want to add a point to that,
Of course.
moderator. Quickly, I want to add a point to that, and it's a sad news for all of us in Africa that we refuse to educate our populace, and the uneducated are becoming our leaders, and that is very scary. Those that will refuse to educate, that have become bandits, that have become touts, are now becoming local government chairmen. They are becoming, they and their children and cronies are becoming our leaders. I wonder where Africa is going if we refuse to educate our people. It's a sad story here. Over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lawal. Indeed, the politicalization of out-of-school children is getting out of hand, and we really need to sit up on this. It is also important that we prioritize putting in our best foot to ensure that those that do not deserve a seat of government to be in the seat of government are not given power. I'll move on to the next question by Moses Oyedele, and it's asking, this question is specifically for Mrs. Kagu. It's asking, in some regions in Africa, especially in Nigeria, we notice that early child marriage is sending children, especially female, away from school. What can we do to put an end to this? Ms. Kagu.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, I do agree with the question, or whoever asked that question, in the sense that teenage pregnancy has become sort of a crisis slowly in Africa. And we are finding more and more children, and especially during the COVID period, the numbers of girls who got pregnant during that period actually spiked. So a lot of what we do have, or a lot of the issues that lead then to teenage pregnancy, number one, I mean, they're teenagers. Sometimes it's out of curiosity. Number two, we have an African system that majority of African countries, they do not allow either for comprehensive sexuality education or sexuality, whether it's not comprehensive sexuality education. We've got an African society where we find some topics taboo. The conversation of sex and how to prevent STIs and all of these things and teenage pregnancies. Parents rarely talk to their children. I know sometimes we can blame them because they're not equipped, or nobody had the talk with them. They feel like they don't have the capacity to have these conversations with their children. However, the reality does not change, is that what then we are having is a generation that has so many teenage mothers. And the crisis, or it has reached to the point where the African Committee of Experts has also come in to try and address the issues. And they're giving us what they call the general comments, which is an expansion of the rights to education. And they're trying to really give us a minimum of what does it mean when you have teenage mothers or teenage, and how can you support them? So when we look within the African context, I'm not so sure whether it's not a one size fits all. It's not a one question that can be addressed by one stakeholder. This has got to take a multi-stakeholder approach, because it starts from the community. It starts from the girls being aware. It starts from us agreeing that they need to have information. It also boils down to us recognizing that gender-based violence most of the time is rarely perpetrated by people who do not know these girls. Majority of the time where they fall pregnant because of gender-based violence, it is the relatives, it is the families, it is the family friend. However, our justice system at some point still allows these cases to be settled out of court, setting a bad precedent, because then if the girl is pregnant, I mean, at that age, or nobody is hearing her side of the story as the victim. We're not using a victim-centered approach to address these issues. I think also it ties into the previous question of politicization, because when it comes to elections, that is when we all or all our politicians remember, oh, my community actually agrees to FGM, or my community, or either we come from a Muslim community and our girls can get married early, or my culture allows a girl to choose and get pregnant at this age, or she can become a wife, or by that time is when we decide that as soon as a girl starts probably getting her menses, then we decide she's old enough to actually be a mother. So I would say it will take a multi-stakeholder approach. It's both a policy, it is both a culture issue, it is also an education issue. But what we cannot do as a continent is fail to keep giving these children information and then stigmatize them when they get pregnant, say they have to drop to school. We have policies that either are not, not having good school, let me call them re-entry policies. And I've always said that, to me, I have never seen pregnancy being contagious. There's no girl who looks at her friend who is pregnant and decides, oh, I actually also want to go through that. I don't think it is fun in any way, because it really complicates this girl's life. So I would say what we need is, or what we need within each country or within each institution, is a framework for school reentry and school retention and support to such girls who have fallen pregnant, because there is so much stigma for them. But it also needs the government to come in terms of the social support and the social security. But we also have to agree, at the end of the day, these are our girls, these are our brothers, these are our sisters. We must be able, or as brothers, these are our sisters. So we must be able to give them the correct information so that we are focusing more on the prevention of teenage pregnancy as opposed to addressing teenage pregnancy.
Wow, thank you so much, Ms. Kagu, for that insightful statement. I see that Mr. Mike wants to speak. Yes.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
I just want to add on that point. One of the things that I've realized that in the African context, right, what maybe you would find on paper or on government, and what when you go to the communities, sometimes there's a big difference, right? So it's always very important that when we address issues like this, we also need to go and look at these communities, because a lot of them will have traditional councils, right? For example, in South Africa, you'll have government, and then you'll have your traditional councils. And then there's presidents, ministers and stuff, but then we still have our own kings, right? So most of the time, the king's duty is, one of the things they are responsible for is to preserve the culture, right? So they understand the culture, like as to what is it that's supposed to be done. So then, because as time goes, cultures are diluted in the process. You will find out people now wanting to make money with young girls. Then they just see, because Mike has certain resources, they want to take the 13-year-old girl to marry Mike, right? But how do we address such things? It's very important that before actually going to the communities, to the fathers and the mothers of these kids, we need to normalize going to the traditional councils, find the king. Before the problem, sit down with the king, talk to the king and say, listen, we have this challenge of young girls getting married, and really, we cannot be having this. We want you to understand why are we saying this. Make the king understand it. Because once the king understands and once the king is on board, there's a certain level or parts of the community that the king will reach, where the government cannot reach, where sometimes even a civil society cannot even reach, right? But if the king is speaking and saying, no, if you say you are doing this as part of Ndebele culture in South Africa, you cannot be doing 1, 2, 3, and 4. All the Ndebele men and parents will have to listen, because they understand he is the king, right? Because I've seen a lot of the time when governments will put in some instructions or policies, sometimes people who are traditional, they won't listen. But once the king speaks, even the traditional one listen. So we always need to make sure that there's that smooth relationship, between the government and these traditional leaders. If they're not on board, we also need to make sure that we go there respectfully, talk to them, try to engage and lobby them to come on board. Then issues like this, then we might be able to drop some numbers on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mike. That was very insightful. I like the way this conversation has tilted, and I would like to announce that we're finally come to the end of this session. This was such a power-packed, powerful session, and thank you to all of our panelists, everyone that was present to speak on this call today. If you know that you learned something transformational and you really enjoyed the course of the conversation, you can leave some indication in the chat box. Let us see that you are excited and you are glad that you made it here. You can drop your favorite emoji or leave a fire emoji for our panelists. Tell them thank you for being here. Thank you. I would also like to appreciate our lead presenter and everyone that has been present for this really insightful conversation today. I would also like to acknowledge the members of the press who have joined us today. Thank you so much for being here. We have our next webinar coming up on the 30th of October, and the webinar's theme is Virtual Learning and Digital Transformation in Education. Is Africa Ready? This is going to be such a power-packed conversation, and we can't wait to unravel that to you all. But you can learn more about that and all of our other upcoming events if you follow us across all of our media platforms. We are at TEP Center across all media channels, and you can get to learn about the work that we are doing and all of our other upcoming events if you follow us across all media platforms as displayed on your screen. And for more information, please, you can check out our website, which is www.tepcenter.com, or you can also email us at info@tepcenter.com. You find these links in the chat box. You can also join our community, subscribe to be on our mailing list, so you'll be the first to know when we have an upcoming event or when our next webinar will be coming up. And the link is also being displayed in the chat box right now. We'd also like to hear your thoughts and feedback. At the Education Partnership Center, we value your opinions, we value your thoughts, we value your suggestions, and we'd like you to click on the link in the chat box to share your feedback with us so that we can improve the quality of our webinar and discussions to meet the most pressing topics in the educational sector. And once again, I am super glad that you're able to join us today. I hope you learned something great, and I hope to see you next month, same time, same place. I would also like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights on this conversation. See you next time. Bye for now. Thank you.